Thank you all for coming, taking time on a Tuesday night. It is, again, Septic Smart Week, which many of you had probably not heard of before, but it's an annual event that is sponsored by EPA to just raise awareness about septic systems. So with that, I do want to thank some sponsors who helped us particularly get the word out about this event. So first of all, these are our statewide sponsors. So the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. MNLICA is a professional association along with MAWA. Both of those groups represent people who work, design, and install septic systems. The Minnesota Realtors Association promoted this event, right? Lots of properties they're selling have septic systems. And then finally, the Minnesota Lakes and Rivers Association, along with MNCOLA, which is the Minnesota Coalition of Lake Associations, also help spread the word about this event. And then we had a bunch of local government sponsors, and actually it went beyond this list. I happened to see something that was in the Alexandria paper yesterday, and Douglas County probably had something to do with that. But these were the counties that right up front said, yep, we think this is a great opportunity to educate our citizens. So you'll see Athens Township, the city of Blaine, Blue Earth County, Carver County, Clearwater County, Lake, Le Sueur, Nicollet, Otter Tail, Renville, and Waseca. So we do again want to thank them because I'm Sarah Hager. I work at the University of Minnesota. And I wouldn't have been able to get you all here tonight. So we really do want to thank our partners for helping to let you know about this event. Just a little bit about our program at the University of Minnesota. Our program began actually in the mid-70s doing education about septic system. And we really do educate any professional we can get the opportunity. So that's students, designers, engineers, installers, inspectors, maintainers, and service providers. We do research and demonstration projects. And what we're focusing on tonight is this next option, which is homeowner operation and maintenance. We also work with small communities to help resolve their problems. So I first off tonight want to talk about what a good septic system is. Most of you who are attending this training tonight are from Minnesota. There's a few of you who might be outside from Minnesota, but some of the terminology and discussion will kind of focus on Minnesota words. And one of them is this term subsurface sewage treatment system, which is more generically called the septic system. So this image shows what is in some of our backyards. We may not be able to see all these components. Most septic system components are below the ground. So in this case, you'll see what's often referred to as a drain field or trenches. We're going to talk a lot more about these components that you're going to see that are buried in your backyard. First thing is a good septic system should not back up into your home. So occasionally it may happen when there's problems going on with a septic system where you can have backup into your home. So some people may experience this when they do numerous loads of laundry in a time, but that is not how good septic systems should operate. They should be able to handle subsequent loads of laundry. They should not surface in your yard or directly into a water body. So there shouldn't be a spongy part of your yard that is saturated. There should not be a connection between your septic system and a lake, river, stream, or ditch. So I can tell you I grew up on a rural farm, and that was the septic system I grew up with. I didn't know it at the time, but we had a tank, and after that tank, it was connected to a tile line, and that tile line ended up going to a ditch. And when I got my job now, a long time ago, 25 years ago, I said to my dad, who, is a good farmer and cared about the land, I said, how did you think that was okay? And he's like, well, that's how it had always been. And he goes, in the water, it looked clean when it came out. And you know what I said? I'm like, well, would you drink that water? And he's like, well, no. But you know who played in that stream as a child, right? Well, that ditch, that would be me, right? So sometimes, even though it's out of sight or out of mind, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be impacting our neighbors or other aquatic species, even things that vectors that could carry those potential diseases back to our home. The next thing every good septic system should have is a watertight septic tank. And we're going to talk more about septic tanks coming up. But there were older septic tanks that were actually designed to leak. If you've ever heard the term dry well or cesspool or seepage pit, those are tanks, again, that are not watertight. And then there are tanks that when they went in, may have been watertight, but develop cracks over time. So that also can leak untreated sewage into the ground. The last one, which is the hardest one to see, but is still very important, is that it is protecting groundwater by having the adequate vertical separation to a saturated zone, bedrock, or confining layer. So I'm guessing most of you tonight are sitting with a beverage in front of you, and it doesn't matter what that beverage is mainly water. And if you think about the water that's in your glass or in your beverage, where do you think that water came from? Right? Has that water ever been used before? And the answer is absolutely, that water has been used before. And because I'm in the business I'm in, do you know where I think that water's been used before? To flush the toilet. So the next time you flush the toilet, I'm assuming you all have septic systems because you're on this call tonight, you just need to assume that somebody's going to want to use that water again. And so that's why having good septic systems and doing your part as far as maintenance is really important to protecting both ground and surface waters. So a little bit more about that septic tank. The job of the septic tank, again, is to catch solids. So things that we put down the drain that are heavier are going to settle to the bottom of the tank, and things that are lighter are going to float to the top of the tank, and that will form the scum layer. So you'll see floating soaps, grease, a little bit of toilet paper. A lot of our toilet paper actually dissolves in the tanks. And the other thing that's really happening in that tank is we are storing solids. That's why the tank will need maintenance. We're also going to have microorganisms that are going to continue to break down the waste. And the reason why I say continue is our digestive system, our guts, start the digestion process, right? When I eat a piece of broccoli, my body breaks down that big complex piece of broccoli into energy that I can use in my body, but it doesn't break it down all the way. But some of those bacteria in my guts, right, they go out to the septic tank and they continue to do the job of breaking down those solids. One thing to note again is anaerobic. So if you've ever smelt a septic tank, it has that, what some people say is stinky. I think it smells great because the smell you're smelling is actually anaerobic digestion. It's a natural process of breaking down those organic solids. So here again shows what a more modern septic tank may look like. And the reason why I say it's modern is a couple things. First off, you'll see that there's manhole risers to the surface. And with some of our older systems, you will not see those. Those will actually be buried in the ground. More of our newer systems to promote maintenance and ease and access, we do have those access risers at the surface. So what you'll notice in this picture that I'm going to point out a few things with a little pen here, right? So here is where the wastewater is coming from the house. And then it's coming into the tank. And what you'll see here is called the baffle. We have one on the way in and on the way out. The purpose of the one on the way in is to make sure the effluent goes down, right? We don't want it to short circuit that tank. The one on the way out of the tank is even more important because it prevents that scum layer. It's actually sitting so that the scum layer isn't going to go out the tank, right? Because it's pulling from this lower level down here. We wouldn't want that scum going out, particularly to our soil treatment system. We're going to talk a little bit more about that effluent filter coming up here on the next slide. So what you'll see forms, again, as I pointed out before, is sludge and scum, and what in the middle is a clear zone. It is by no means clean, but it is much cleaner by the time you leave the septic tank than it was when it came in. So about half of the solids are actually removed in the septic tank. So the tank you're looking at here is what's called a 2-compartment septic tank. And some of our, again, tanks only have one, some of them have 2. They all look a little different, but you have something kind of like this in your backyard. So here shows a picture of some of those effluent screens. So they're sometimes called either screens or filters. They've been around for a number of years, but they're becoming more commonly used. So these are proprietary devices that replace or kind of are in the place of that outlet filter. So they're designed to remove additional suspended solids that are in our wastewater. So what results is that the water leaving the septic tank, the wastewater, is even cleaner than it would be without it. So they are a really great addition to septic systems. So a little bit now about soil-based treatment. So where does it go after the septic tank? So again, after the septic tank, with most of our systems in Minnesota, it goes to a soil-based treatment system. So the soil has many natural treatment methods. It's actually I think it's one of the most amazing things about septic system is we take this relatively dirty wastewater and the natural physical processes of the soil, chemical processes, and the actual microbiology living in the soil breaks down the water. So in addition to treatment, the other critical thing that the soil does is it allows for water movement. So the picture you see here on the right is still, to date, the most common system that's in the ground in Minnesota, which is what I showed before, is a trench system. It's a pipe with rock. And the rock you see here in the picture doesn't do the treatment for us. It just helps spread the water out to the soil. So where the treatment really happens is in the soil underneath the rock you see here in the picture. So we'll get more into suitable soil, but we are designing that underneath that media, we will have a suitable soil. That suitable soil will have biodegradation. So that means the biology of the soil will break down harmful components in the wastewater. We will have pathogens. So those again are the things that make us sick that are killed off. We will have conversion of nutrients. We will have binding with soil minerals. We'll even have plant uptake if our systems are installed shallow enough. Some of you may even be able to see where your septic system is because it's the green spot in the yard. Well, the reason why it's green is because of water and nutrients. The other thing that will happen with our septic system in that suitable soil is deep percolation of the water. So all of this water that we're taking from our homes is going into a relatively small area, and most of it is not evaporating. Most of it is moving down, and then it's either moving laterally to a lake, river, stream, or ditch, or it's actually moving subsurfacely into deeper groundwater. So this treatment in an STA, and if you noticed that on a slide earlier, that's just soil treatment area. So there's many different types of soil treatment areas. So that's kind of the generic term. So after we take the effluent from the septic tank and we apply it to the soil, we start to feed the soil microorganisms. So they come to that soil interface and they accumulate. And we actually call this layer that accumulates, and here again, we're looking at a trench. We'll talk about mounds coming up, but across the bottom of this trench, where we are spreading out the sewage, you see something forming that we call the biomat, sometimes called the biozone. It's an active area where the microbes are consuming the organic material that's being applied to the soil. That biomat is actually a good thing. It makes sure that that things don't move too quickly, that we have enough microorganisms to consume the food we're putting out there. So it definitely assists in the process. So laid out in someone's backyard, this is what the septic system might look like, right? We start from the house. And in some of our homes, we're able to actually use gravity out of the home. Sometimes you may need a pump in the basement, but very often we'll have a building sewer that leaves the home that goes gravity to the septic tank. And in some instances, you also may be lucky enough that it will gravity flow out to the soil treatment system like you see here. So the other critical thing I want to point out in this picture that we're going to come back to several times this evening is this number of 3 foot separation. That 3 foot of separation is what is required to assure that we are getting good treatment. Yes, and I see several questions about maintenance and products, and we are going to get to those topics later in the presentation. So what about if you don't? So I'm going to take one step back. See how in this picture that 3 feet down here is from the bottom of the system to our limiting condition. Well, about half of Minnesota's soils don't naturally have enough soil to do this. To have this system be not visible at the surface, you would actually have to have about 4 feet of dry soil. So with that being said, that's why you will see elevated systems, and that's all a mound system really is it is a system where we bring in sand, and the purpose of that sand is to elevate the system to achieve that same 3 feet. And it's a little harder to read in this picture, but what you'll see here is, again, we have the bottom of our system, we bring in that clean sand to meet our 3 feet of separation. The other thing that is different about this system is it will always have a pump tank or a dosing chamber, pressure distribution where we apply the effluent over the top of that sand. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't effectively utilize the whole area. Because if you think about sand, if you just dump a bunch of water on it, it doesn't spread out across the area. And a lot of the areas where we build mound systems, we have very shallow water tables. So we do want to make sure that we are spreading out that water. So it'll both treat it and accept that wastewater. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about where we generate wastewater in our home and some of the contaminants that we add when we're using water. Just so you know, again, most of the water that we use in, most of the wastewater we create that's coming out of our house, it's mainly water, but there are contaminants we add. So whether it is called black water, which is traditionally what comes out of our toilets, and our kitchen sink is actually a pretty concentrated source, or gray water from washing our dishes or washing our clothing, it all contains contaminants that need to be treated. But first off, I just want to talk about how much water. So when we design septic systems, it is based on bedrooms. So we don't know how many people are going to live in a given house, but we can predict the typical maximum occupancy based on bedrooms. So our rules in Minnesota assume 2 people per bedroom. And the typical number we use is 150 gallons per day per bedroom. There are, again, a couple allowances if you have a very primitive cabin and you don't have a lot of water using devices to not use 150. But most of our homes in Minnesota do have more than 2 water using devices. So we do see generally that 150 gallon number. So that is a peak flow. So if you take a typical 3-bedroom house, that would be 450 gallons per day of water. That doesn't mean you should use 450 gallons per day. That is like the peak day you have everybody over for Christmas. So on average, we want you to be somewhere in the range of 1/3 of that to up to 1/2 on a typical day. Because if systems get hit that hard every single day, it will impact the longevity of the system. So we do encourage people reasonably to conserve water. And the analogy about your car is a really good analogy in that the more miles you drive or the more water you use, you are impacting the overall life of that system. You also may be influencing how often you need to get your oil changed. And the analogy there is how often you need to get your septic tank pumped. So if you think about a typical person in Minnesota or the US, we use about 27,000 gallons of water a year, which means we generate 27,000 gallons of wastewater. So a typical home with 3 people, it's not directly linear. We use a little less water as we add more people. But a typical septic system sees 58,000 gallons of water a year, which again, think about where your drain field is in your backyard or your mound system. It's pretty amazing that it's able to recycle that much water back. And then if you think about your community or the closest, maybe you live on a lake or close to a river or whatever water you love in Minnesota, think about 250 homes around that. 250 homes create about 14.5 million gallons of wastewater a year. And so that's a lot of wastewater. So it really is important with septic systems that we're treating that water properly and returning it back into the hydrologic cycle. So what do we add to that water? So if you look on the right, those are our main water using activities in our home: flushing the toilet, using the kitchen sink, bathing and laundry. And you would see all of those activities add contaminants that we wouldn't want to send out to the environment. So we're going to next discuss how septic systems deal with pathogens, the things that make us sick. How do septic systems deal with solids and nutrients? And finally, we'll talk about chemicals, cleaning products, water treatment devices, medications, right? Whether they be over the counter or prescribed. How do we deal with those when we're using a septic system to treat our wastewater? So first, looking at pathogens, these are the things that make us sick. So viruses and bacteria. And I just want to point out, most bacteria are completely harmless, but there are a few of them, right, that certainly cause illness. There's also pathogenic worms and protozoa that live in our wastewater. These are the things that make us sick. So, and when we are sick, we often are shedding those harmful microorganisms in our bodily waste. So when you think about, why do we wash our clothes? Well, because they're dirty, right? And there actually are viruses and bacteria that end up on our clothing. And when we wash our hands, right? That's why we wash our hands. But also we can certainly think of it that the primary source for those is from our toilets. So if these pathogens get out into the environment, they do have the risk of impacting human health. And I once had a family member actually say to me that, they had an old system and they had a wet spot in a grove of trees. And she said, well, we don't go there. We stay away from that area. But, when my dog got to her house, the first spot my dog wanted to go was that stinky wet mess. And my dog liked to give kisses, right? Those two things. So it's not, there are also can be other carriers. So, things like mosquitoes, things like mice that could potentially carry those viruses and bacteria. So how do we deal with these bad things, right, that can make us sick? So the primary source I mentioned for these pathogens is our human waste. So our human waste is our guts, and our guts are actually anaerobic. So these microorganisms have difficulty living in an oxygen-rich environment. So we design our septic system to be aerobic. That's what that 3 feet of treatment is about. The other thing is these organisms are used to living at 98 degrees, our body temperature. So also the soil is not, does not favor or promote their growth or their life. So 3 feet of soil treatment is key to removal of bacteria and viruses. So moving on to solids. And I know this might be a gross picture for you all. To me, it's just a day at work. I actually took this picture last week. That's an effluent filter that is just full of solids. And it was to the point that when I pulled it, a bunch of water ran out, which means it was so full, it was holding back water. So when I look at this effluent filter, are they all organic solids? It's actually pretty hard to tell. If I look at it really close, I think there's some things that aren't organic, but it also looks kind of greasy, right? That there may be a lot of fat, oils, and grease that screen caught. So what organic solids are digested, so things we've eaten or things we haven't eaten, undigested animal and vegetable material. There's also synthetic organic compounds that we use within our homes. So these things, if they reach a lake, river, or stream, will suck oxygen out of it. So there's actually a test you can run in the lab that's called that BOD test that measures how much oxygen. So how we deal with these in a septic system is some of these solids are going to settle out and get removed when the tank is cleaned. An effluent filter, like you see in this picture, will help. But some of this organic material is going to make it out to the soil treatment area and be a food source for those microorganisms. And as long as we don't overload the soil, that's okay. The other thing that you'll notice is with a foot of unsaturated soil, the soil microorganisms will eat up all of that organic material. So moving on to inorganic solids, these are harder for our septic systems to deal with. So where these come from would be, for instance, fibers from synthetic clothing, which might be lint from your washing machine, minerals, metals, and salts that can come from soil material, your plumbing system, or even makeup. The challenge of these inorganic solids is the soil microorganisms can't consume them. They're not subject to decay. It's a little hard to see in this picture, but that's actually effluent from a septic tank. And what you can kind of notice is that bottle is clear, but you can't see through it. It's actually cloudy because there's solids that are staying in suspension. So how we deal with these in a septic system is similar to what we just talked about with organic material, in that it'll be stored, a screen will help, and the soil will remove them. The unfortunate thing is when the soil removes them, it cannot digest them. So they're just going to accumulate at that soil interface. And septic systems don't last forever, right? So 25, 30, 40 years is a typical life expectancy. But a lot of systems, when they eventually malfunction, it's at that interface where the sewage goes into the soil. And one of the reasons for that is these inorganic solids, which can plug up the pore space in the soil. So moving on to the nutrients. So the first one here is phosphorus. So our lakes and rivers in Minnesota are primarily phosphorus limited. Meaning when you see a water body like this, that is due to excess phosphorus feeding, in this case, the algae, but it can be other aquatic vegetation. The fact of the matter is we consume food that has phosphorus in it that we don't need, so we excrete it in our urine. If you are putting food directly down the drain, for instance, through your garbage disposal, or even a normal drain, some food particles are going to get down, that has phosphorus in it. And it still is present in some household detergents, not laundry detergent, but for instance, dishwashing detergent. So phosphorus, again, is removed in good septic systems. So 3 feet of soil will actually grab onto that phosphorus. The removal life is based on the soil type, the mineralogy, and how much separation you have. But most Minnesota soils, the phosphorus removing capacity will be the length of your septic system. So it's really not a large concern for most septic systems in Minnesota. So moving on to nitrogen. Nitrogen is a similar issue to phosphorus in that it is something that we consume in excess. So we excrete it in our urine, and if we're putting food down the drain, it is also present. For instance, if you're using ammonia-based cleaners, that is nitrogen. The biggest impact that it has in Minnesota is on groundwater. So drinking water quality, meaning we'll talk about well testing coming up here, but we do not want to drink water that has more than 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. In coastal areas, so if you're talking about the oceans, so if you've ever heard about, for instance, the red tides in Florida of algae, ocean waters are limited by nitrogen. So in those environments, it actually causes weed and algal growth. So how these are treated, different septic systems remove different amounts of nitrogen. For instance, a mound system does a better job at overall nitrogen removal than a trench system does. But the other, one of the more also critical ways we deal with that nitrate is by having well setbacks. So that's why we never put a septic system right by the well, and that the minimum setback is 50 feet. There are examples, though, even in Minnesota, where we are concerned, particularly as systems get larger for clusters and restaurants and campgrounds, where they may have to put in advanced nitrogen treatment because those flows are so much higher and we can't just rely upon dilution. So the last topic I wanted to bring up is, what about all the other stuff we're putting down the drain, right? Cleaners, medication. And if you may have heard this term in the news, is contaminants of emerging concern. So we are now measuring at really small amounts for different contaminants that we may see out in the environment. In large amounts, there is the risk that these can harm septic systems. I think, one example might be a household where one of the family members is going through chemotherapy, and some chemotherapy drugs can be pretty hard on a septic system. And while they're doing that, they're using lots of antibacterial products because they don't want to get sick. And we don't have the benefit of dilution with our home, with our neighbors. So you can actually create a toxic environment for your septic system. If some of those contaminants get out in the environment, so one that's been brought up a lot, for instance, is estrogen. If we get excess estrogen out in the environment, it can affect the aquatic food chain and species reproduction. We have found trace amounts of even things like ibuprofen in drinking water. So it is a risk that some of these things do not fully break down during wastewater treatment process. So with that, I just wanted to show you a little bit of data, and I'm not going to overwhelm you with lots of slides with lots of data, and we won't get into the great detail around this. But what I want to point out is you'll see different compounds, and a lot of these, again, are prescription medications, but you'll see, right, caffeine's on the list coming out of most of our homes, and caffeine in the environment probably isn't our biggest problem, but things like DEET and ibuprofen and flame retardants. Well, what happens when those get out to septic systems? So that's what you'll see in this column is typical removal in septic systems. And this was a study done at MassTech in Massachusetts out on Cape Cod, where they have really sandy soils, and they're worried about those sandy soils moving contaminants into the groundwater. And what you'll notice for the most part is that a shallow pressurized, so that's with a pump, septic system did an excellent job at removal. There are a couple things though that made their way through, right? Mycosynol is an antifungal medication, and the last one is a flame retardant. So the mycosynol may not have been broken down by those soil microbes because, again, part of the microbial community in the soil is actually fungus, right? So mushrooms and all of that in the soil. So the soil, and the other one, the flame retardants are very resistant to treatment. The other thing to kind of compare is when they did this study, they compared it to other research out there comparing activated sludge wastewater treatment plants. So why would septic systems be doing a better job than a wastewater treatment plant? Well, there's two really explanations. One is the amount of time we have for treatment. From when the time the wastewater leaves your house to gets 3 feet below the drain field or the mound, that takes days or weeks, where a typical wastewater treatment plant only has hours. The other big distinction is the microbial community living in the soil is much more diverse. So, I mean, to me, again, the overall story is good, but it doesn't mean that any wastewater treatment plant or system is 100% able to deal with all of these contaminants. All right, so with that, we're going to move into management. And Chris, you don't have to answer all my questions. I'm going to get to some of them. Oh, I don't hear an echo. Are you guys hearing an echo? I'm going to keep rolling. So when it comes to maintenance, the number one thing I want to start with is what's in your backyard. So some people know exactly what's in their backyard and some people don't. So do you have one septic tank? Do you have multiple septic tanks? You want to determine that. So it's not always the same. Do you have an effluent filter? Do you have a pump? If you have a pump, you should also have an alarm. You should start with, again, do you have a copy of your design or as-built? If you don't, you want to contact your county or your permitting authority to get your records. So since 1996, every septic system in Minnesota should have a record. So start with whoever your permitting authority is. Sometimes that could be a city or a township, but more often than not, you can start with your county. You can also ask an installer if you know who installed it. And the last option, if none of those work, is the next time you get your septic system maintained, have your pumper, your maintainer, explain to you what's actually going on in your backyard. They can walk you through really what is buried, because they look at these every single day. So I do want to also point out, though, there are some risks with septic systems that are in our backyard. I mentioned that those gases smell good to me. I'm the only one. They are also in high amounts. They're flammable and they're hazardous. Like, you never want to enter a septic tank. It's considered a confined space. It could actually kill you, not as much because of the gases, but because there's not enough oxygen there. We all know that wastewater makes us sick. The other thing that is the most important thing that I want you to hear is that your septic tank has 4 or 5 feet of wastewater in it. And just last week, a 2-year-old in Virginia drowned in a septic tank because they fell through the lid. So your lids always need to be secured in place. The other risk with septic tanks is that they should not be driven over with large equipment. So large equipment to me is anything larger than a riding lawnmower, because they can actually collapse if they have a lot of heavy weight that's driving over the top of them. So we're never going to enter a septic tank. We do not want to smoke or have a fire near your septic tank. If wastewater is on the surface, that should not be a long-term plan. If you have a system that is malfunctioning, that is a public health issue and needs to be addressed. Do not use electrical tools near the water or wet ground. Keep vehicles and heavy equipment off of your system. And again, most importantly, assure all your lids are secured in place to prevent entry at all times. So with that, we're going to watch a quick video here.
And 1 in 5 households in the United States depend on septic systems to treat their wastewater. A properly maintained septic system safeguards your family's health, protects the environment, and can save you thousands of dollars on repairs. What can I do to protect my system? Quick tip number 5, protect it and inspect it. Residential septic systems should be regularly inspected by a service provider.
Hi, I'm Mike. I inspect septic systems throughout Northern Virginia. A typical septic tank inspection includes measuring the scum thickness or grease at the top of the tank, as well as the solids that accumulate on the bottom. This will help us to determine how well sewage flows through the tank and how often it needs to be pumped. Your local service providers can also inspect for leaks or other potential issues as well. To determine how often your system should be inspected, consider these factors: your system type and size, the size of your household, and the amount of water you use. While many houses have conventional gravity systems that typically need to be inspected every 1 to 3 years, those with advanced treatment systems or electrical components such as pumps should be inspected annually at a minimum. An inspection today can prevent a costly repair tomorrow.
So do your part to be septic smart. Contact your service provider to learn how often your system should be checked. Inspecting your septic system regularly can save you money and protect you and your family's health.
So what you'll see in that picture is actually called generically a sludge judge. So that is a device where you can actually measure how full your tank is. So we'll talk more about that coming up here. So before we get into maintenance, I do want to talk about the difference between inspection and maintenance. So in Minnesota in particular, and even outside Minnesota, the word inspection usually means you're evaluating the system for compliance. And when they do that, when they come out to evaluate your system for compliance, they're going to look again for a couple key things. One, that it's not backing up and surfacing, that you have a good watertight tank, and that you're meeting your separation to the limiting condition. Typically, to do that, your tank will be emptied to determine that, again, that tank is watertight. So you'll have maintenance kind of being done at the same time. If the system, if you have it inspected and it doesn't pass, that will be then the trigger time that your system will need to be upgraded. That is not what they're doing when they come out just to do maintenance on your tank. Maintenance is servicing your septic system with no regulatory triggers and no, in particular, no evaluation of the separation. So you don't need to worry that you're going to get in trouble if you have your system maintained. And there may be times you may have to get your system inspected. So you may be selling your property and the county you live in or the lender may require an inspection. So there are times to think about having an inspection done and that has value, but that is not the regular activity when your septic system is going to be maintained. So when it comes to maintenance, every 1 to 3 years, the septic tank should be evaluated. It does not actually say it has to be pumped, but generally speaking, when someone comes out with a large vac truck, like you're going to see coming up, they generally are going to actually clean your tank at that time. The interval is not the same number for everyone because it's dependent upon the size of your septic tank, your water use habits within the home. But the key reason why we have the septic tank maintained is to prevent solids from overloading the soil treatment area. So backing up wastewater, that could cause backup of wastewater into the structure or cause surfacing. So I saw there was a related question about a holding tank, which goes to a drain field that's used for 4 months in the summer. How often should the holding tank be pumped? So this is a good time to talk about the word holding tank. So in Minnesota, if you say you have a holding tank, it means you just have a tank that every time it fills up, it has to be pumped and that you actually don't have a drain field. So the fact that you have a drain field means you have an overall septic system. And this same 1 to 3 years would apply to you. So what our rules say is that every 3 years you should have your system looked at. And the biggest reason for that is, let's say your baffle fell off at year 2, right? We wouldn't want you to go another 3 years without an outlet baffle. So they will actually look for more than just does the tank need to be cleaned. So that's a good question. So with that, we're going to see a little video here of them actually pumping out a tank.
Most residential septic tanks should be pumped every 3 to 5 years. Some types of specialized or advanced treatment systems may require more frequent pumping and other maintenance.
Hi, I'm Robert, septic pumper in Northern Virginia. Your septic tank contains 3 substances: effluent, scum, and sludge. Over time, scum or grease accumulates on the top level, while sludge or solids sit on the bottom. During a scheduled pump out, the operator uses a vacuum line to remove the buildup. The effluent or untreated wastewater travels from your drains to filters that separate the scum and the sludge. These filters should be taken out and cleaned during the pump out service. Follow recommendations from your service provider and local health department.
So do your part to be septic smart. To keep your system working in top condition, schedule to pump out your septic tank at appropriate regular intervals, and keep your maintenance records in a handy place so you know your system's service history.
So one thing to note about that video is that not all of our systems look the way you saw there, right? With all of those risers at the surface. Some of them look like what you see here in this photo. And this was very common going back 10 or 20 years, that the lids would be buried about a foot below the surface. Those risers, like you see here in the picture, do need to be dug up and accessed. So when tank cleaning is needed is when more than 25% of the tank liquid depth is storing sludge and scum. So I mentioned, right, most tanks are 4 to 5 feet in depth. So if the easy math, right, would you have a 4-foot depth tank? If you have more than a foot of sludge and scum, that tank should be cleaned. And in my experience, most homeowners, most homes with, people using normal usage, every 2 or 3 years, they are going to have a foot or so of sludge or scum that builds up in their system. So during your tank cleaning, that term sludge is pretty accurate. There's this kind of heavy material that's sitting on the bottom. So it typically takes back flushing or stirring. So you'll see here, he's got a big bar where he's kind of pushing the sludge around in the tank to get the sludge off the bottom. The other very critical thing to get tanks clean is that that the maintainer who you hire to do the job cleans the system through that large diameter access. So that's 20 inches or more. And like you see here in the picture again, he had to dig up that lid. I will just suggest though, if you regularly have to have your lid dug up like you see here in the picture, adding a riser so it's at grade in the future might be something to consider. But what I really do want to highlight is that photo on the right. There is no way to get the tank clean if you're just putting that hose down there. I do see a question about the effluent filters, and yes, those can be added after the fact. It can be sometimes challenging depending on the depth of your tank, but it's certainly something to talk to your septic system professional about. So here again, they're cleaning the effluent screen. So with effluent screens, the most important thing is that it be washed directly off into the septic tank, not into the yard. The cleaning may be done every 6 months. Some homes can go a year or 2 years between that. If you are washing it off back into the septic tank, you want to do it at the inlet side of this tank. We don't want to wash all those solids off and have them go out to the drain field. So after you get your tank serviced, you should be getting a report. The report should include the amount of sludge and scum that was in the tank, any tank leakage. And I do see Tony asked a question about a tank that he is having groundwater and or rainwater that's getting into the tank, and that shouldn't be happening. So when systems are installed, they are installed that those tanks should be watertight, but we do often have, sometimes it's a plastic riser on a concrete tank, and there can be challenges with that seal. But you really do not want to pump all that excess surface or groundwater out to your system. You have the risk of actually causing a lot of damage to your soil treatment area. So during this visit, that would be something they would note if you had water running in your risers, if there's any troubleshooting or repairs. So to me, I think that this report is kind of like when you go get your oil changed and they give you like their 12-point inspection. So they're going to tell you other things about your system. I strongly encourage you to be home when they come and do your maintenance, so you can actually have a conversation about your system. If you are not given a report, you should actually ask for one because it is actually required in rule that they're giving you a report, like a status update about your system. Kind of one of the last notes here about maintenance is, so when they take out all of that sludge and scum, and they are going to do their best to get that tank as clean as possible. Keep in mind, it is not sparkling clean when they're done. There's still a little bit of stuff maybe in the corners. So there's a little bit of seed left over. And then the next time you flush the toilet, you are going to start seeding your septic system again. So there is no third-party research that supports the effectiveness of any of the septic system additives that are on the market. So some of them are advertised to be starters. There's so much bacteria in sewage. We do not need to feed our sewage. We feed it every single day. And finally, cleaners. The MPCA regulations actually ban the use of these products, as they may move the solids out of the septic tank and out to your soil treatment area. So how do you go about hiring someone? So maybe it's a pumper, a maintainer, maybe it's an inspector. So I always think the best way, and it's just like anything that you're getting done around your house, if you have people that have had good experience, so referrals are a great place to start. There is a license list that is run by the MPCA, who license all the septic system professionals. It's a very long address. So if you just Google MPCA SSTS license search, and then you can select the county you live, but keep in mind neighboring counties, because I have yet to meet a pumper who only works in one county, or an inspector. And then you can interview them. You can ask them questions. Are they going to pump through the manhole? Do they have a sludge judge? Do they backflush? Do they recommend additives? I recommend not starting with the first one, which is, you know, where I want to start too, right? How much does it cost? But the difference of $25 may be the difference between you actually getting your tank cleaned or not. So the last thing with maintenance, and we are going to talk about soil treatment system maintenance coming up, which I think there's a question about mounds, and that's a little bit more on the soil treatment area. As far as record keeping, there are some jurisdictions that may require that a report be submitted. This isn't a compliance report, it's just that the maintenance was done. But it's always wise to keep a record of your system's design and installation, and then your service report. So if you ever look to sell in particular, it'll make those new property owners or potential owners feel better that the septic system has been properly taken care of. The permitting authority, again, may keep a copy of these records, and certainly like your as-built and design, they will have, but it's always good, again, to have a copy for yourself. All right, so with that, I just wanted to touch on wells. This isn't the purpose of this class, but most of you also have a private well on your property.
Confirm that your well water meets local drinking water standards by conducting a water quality test in your well once a year.
I'm Mike. I inspect well and septic systems throughout Northern Virginia. Testing your well water for harmful bacteria, contaminants, and acidity protects your family's health. It can also indicate if your septic system is functioning properly.
So do your part to be septic smart. Don't flush medications or excessive amounts of harmful chemicals down the drain or toilet, as they can also contaminate your well.
Test your well water at home or contact your local health department for assistance. You can also use a state-certified laboratory. Find one in your area by calling EPA's Safe Drinking Water Hotline.
Ensuring your well water is safe to drink will protect you and your family's health. Catching potential problems early may also help you minimize costs to remedy any problems with your well.
So this is the recommended testing from the Minnesota Department of Health. So if you, again, have a private well on your property, you are operating both your own water and wastewater system. So what they recommend is that you're testing your well every year for coliform bacteria. Coliform bacteria would be the indication of the excrement of a warm-blooded animal, which I don't think any of us want to drink. They then recommend nitrate every other year, arsenic at least once, lead at least once, and manganese before a baby is drinking that water. So more information on MDH's website about those. All right, so with that, we're going to move into home management tips, and we will come back to kind of talking a little bit more later about soil treatment areas and maintenance there. So the first real key thing we're going to talk about is what we put down the drain.
Be aware of your household's water use. Efficient water use improves the operation of a septic system and reduces the risk of failure. Septic systems can only handle a set amount of water. Avoid overburdening your system by staggering your water use. If your household is running a shower, the washing machine, and dishwasher at the same time, you increase the risk of a sewage backup in your home or a flooded septic drain field in your yard. So do your part to be septic smart. Spread out your water use throughout the day, conserve water, and look for the Energy Star and WaterSense labels when purchasing water-based appliances. Not straining your drain can save you money and protect you and your family's health.
So some general recommendations when it comes to water usage, and we're going to get more into products here, is first of all, just listening for drips and leaks. I don't know if you guys noticed early on, I showed that pie chart of where we use water in homes, and in the range of 5 to 10% of the typical water use in a home is due to leaks. So I don't know if you've ever had the toilet handle you jiggle or the faucets that drip, but over time, those drips add a lot of water to the system. So we do want to choose appliances that offer water and energy efficient cycles. So there are, again, appliances that have those ratings that will be better for our septic systems. Another really good thing to remember and to pass on to people who visit you or your family is to not use your toilet or your septic system as a garbage can. The toilet is probably the most infamous location that people flush things that really shouldn't be flushed down the drain. We want to limit the use of harsh cleaners and sanitizers as they will kill the beneficial bacteria in the septic system. A lot of those cleaners and sanitizers, again, are designed to kill bacteria. They're antibacterial products. The downside is that, again, those products don't know who the good bacteria are and who the bad ones are. So they tend to kill all of them, which can be super negative. As far as product recommendations, that's a really hard one to answer because there's so many products. I think about like when I was a kid, what was, in the cleaning aisle, and now we have so many products. The nice thing is this organization called the EWG, which is the Environmental Working Group, actually has evaluated a bunch of cleaners. And they've evaluated them for public health and environmental impacts. But any product that gets an A with them for environmental impacts and public health is also a product that is better for the septic system. We will post these slides along with this video, assuming it's of good enough quality, on the website. So if you aren't able to write that down, we will post the slides. All right, moving on to that toilet.
Load the commode. Remember, your toilet is not a trash can. Here's some easy advice. Do not flush anything besides human waste and toilet paper. Everything that goes down your toilet ends up in your septic system. Items such as diapers and baby wipes, hygiene products, cigarette butts, and cat litter belong in the trash, not your toilet. They do not decompose in your septic tank and can shorten the life of your system. Harsh chemicals from drain cleaners and some cleaning products can also harm your septic system and should be used sparingly. Flushing such items down the toilet can clog your pipes and damage your septic system, which can result in costly repairs. So do your part to be septic smart. Always dispose of these non-flushable items in the trash.
So some specifics about our bathroom. In our homes, the toilet is the #1 water user. So if your toilet looks like this, I actually think this is now retro and has come back. But this toilet is using over 5 gallons every time you flush the toilet. So the new toilets, again, use 1.6 gallons or less. So you will dramatically cut back on water usage. The other big issue with toilets is leaking toilets. So I mentioned that seal when you have to jiggle the handle to get the water to stop. Those again can add hundreds of gallons of water every day to your system. So some other recommendations, many of the toilet cleaners on the market are very hard on septic systems. So I remember a product called Iron Out growing up that we used that would just kind of melt away the iron, but you didn't want it to touch your skin or you didn't really want to breathe it. Those sorts of cleaners are really hard on septic systems. We do not want to use the toilet cleaners that make your toilet bowl blue or every time you flush, because every time you flush, if you do that, what it means is, again, you are sanitizing your system. So if you do need to use a cleaner, use a small amount and use some elbow grease. As the video discussed, only human waste and toilet paper. None of that other stuff should be going into the system. It just accumulates in the tank and can actually create a mess even further downstream. I have seen cigarette butts out in a soil treatment system. So they really can cause big problems. So things to consider is shorter showers versus baths. I mean, particularly some of those bigger bathtubs can use a lot of water. Using low flow fixtures, avoid daily cleaners. So it's just you're constantly, when you're using daily cleaners, you are sanitizing your system over and over again. Avoid the use of antibacterial soaps. As they're no more effective than just using regular old bar soap. And I do recommend bar soap because you use less soap. And that is the general takeaway, is the less soap we are putting out to our system, the better off, or the better for our system. So what about clogged drains? So you want to start with preventing the clogs. So using adequate strainers in your sinks and showers and tubs. So, they make inexpensive metal or plastic drain screens. Sometimes though, you can still end up with hair, and that hair tends to catch soap and other particles. But when drains do plug, it's usually in a trap below the sink. So then you can maybe take it apart or use a plunger or a snake. But a majority of the products that are sold on the market to clear drains, a product like we've all heard of, which is Drano, right? There was actually a study done with Drano where they found the typical amount of Drano used by a homeowner kills off almost all the microorganisms in the septic tank. So we really do not want to use a really aggressive, harmful product to clear drains. So moving on to laundry. So when it comes time to buy a new washing machine, this is another time where you really can cut back on your water usage. Installing a front-loading washing machine or an efficient top loader will dramatically cut back on your water usage. They also have the benefit that they get your clothes drier, and if you don't have an agitator, they actually beat your clothing less, so you get less lint. You also want to think about spreading out your loads. So even throughout the day, so if you need to do a couple loads in a day, it's just better not to do them back to back. You want to avoid Saturday laundry day, right? Spread that out throughout the week, also if possible. Another thing to consider doing is adding a washing machine lint filter. So washing clothes releases a lot of lint. Believe it or not, more lint comes off in your washing machine than your dryer. And we all have a lint filter on our dryer, but most of us don't have one on our washing machine. So they do make aftermarket washing machine filters. There's one of them that's in the diagram, or in the photo on the right here. If you want to try it, if you have a discharge line, you could put a screen on that will catch some of it, or you can install an aftermarket lint filter. So what you'll see there in that hand is what came out of a filter. And so it's not necessarily all inorganic material. It also catch other solids that happen to be on our clothing. You want to limit your use of bleach and other sanitizing products. So if you need to, do a load with a cup of bleach, that is not going to kill off all of the good bacteria, but you don't want a laundry detergent that is sanitizing in every load. You want to limit the detergent to the minimum amount you need to get your clothing clean. So particularly if you have soft water, water softener, I usually tell people start with half of what they recommend on the package. And that's why I do not recommend people using the pods, because you have no way to control how much detergent you're putting in. Some of the inexpensive powdered products on the market contain clay as a filler. The purpose of the filler is to keep things flowing, but we do not want tiny clay particles getting out to our septic tank, and then because they don't like to settle, and they may actually end up getting over to the soil. We do not recommend the use of liquid fabric softeners, as they've been found to affect that natural layering in the septic tank. So other things to consider is adding a half a cup of baking soda or vinegar, which can help soften the clothes. I have some dryer balls. The only bummer of those, I now have the wool ones. I started with the plastic ones, and when those are banging around, not good right before bed. So if you have a lot of static, an aluminum foil ball, believe it or not, will help deal with that. So on to the kitchen. Ways to, again, cut back on our water usage and our load is to run the dishwasher full, or to fill the sink. Do not, continually run water while you're washing dishes. Make sure the detergent you're using is phosphate free. At the sink, make sure you're scraping your plates into either your compost or your garbage. Fix your leaks. And fats and oils are always solid waste. So we do not want bacon grease, the fried addy, you name it, all of that should not be going down the drain. You can limit clean water usage by thawing your food in the refrigerator. And probably the biggest one and the ongoing kind of question we get is about garbage disposals. So the challenge of garbage disposals is they take big pieces of food and they grind them into little pieces. Those little pieces do not settle out as well, and they haven't been digested by us. I saw someone put into the notes again that someone said, don't put anything in your system unless it's gone through you. And it's actually pretty good advice. If you wouldn't eat it, you probably shouldn't put it in your system. And on top of it, when you eat food again, you digest it, right? You break it down. If you have one in Minnesota, our regulations actually require that you have extra septic tank capacity to help with some of these challenges we talked about. But even if you have one, I just encourage you to just use it sparingly, just because we don't want to decrease the life of our system.
Pouring fats, grease, and solids down your sink can clog your pipes or damage your septic system over time, requiring additional maintenance and pumping. In some cases, it can even lead to system failure. So do your part to be septic smart. Keep those harmful materials from going down your drain. Instead, collect that waste in an airtight container and then discard the food waste into a compost bin or trash can. Use cleaning supplies such as soaps, surface cleaners, bleach, etc. in moderation, as excessive use of antibacterial products and harsh chemicals can harm your septic system. Thinking at the sink can protect your septic system and prevent plumbing problems, which can save you the hassle and expense of costly repairs.
All right, moving down the stream to the utility room. So this is kind of the catch-all room. So do not allow clean water from some pumps or tile lines to drain into the system. We just do not design the system to handle that capacity. Do not run water to prevent a system from freezing. We'll talk more about freezing coming up here. The other thing to consider is routing other uncontaminated sources out of your system. So the list here we have is furnace condensate, dehumidifiers, water treatment devices such as water softeners, iron filters, and reverse osmosis. So I want to spend another minute or two here with this one. And I think someone had this question. It's a very common question. And that is, where should my water softener discharge go, or my iron filter, which are actually a little different. But whenever possible, it is better if they are routed out of the system. So again, water softeners have a very salty brine. Iron filters actually create an iron solid that is typically back flushed out. And both of those, for different reasons, can cause challenges with septic systems. The key thing about water softeners is the smallest amount of salt you can get out to your system, the better. So if you have an old softener, for instance, they use a lot more salt than the newer models, which regenerate based on demand. So if you have more specific questions about any of those, we can talk about it later at the end of the session. Reverse osmosis, again, we're really not referring to under the sink units. We're referring to entire home RO systems that really can generate a lot of extra water that the septic system was not designed to handle. So hazardous waste, again, should never be entering our system. And again, small amounts of it, right? You may have paint on your hands, right? A little of that. But what we're really concerned about, again, is when you have unused hazardous waste, you should find a location for that to go. Most counties, again, have drop-off locations. If you have unused medicine, again, that should never be flushed down the drain. The FDA has a great resource on their website. You can even just Google FDA and drug take back, where you put in your zip code and it shows all the locations that you can drop it off. And I think it's been nice. I've noticed where I live that more and more of our pharmacies actually have take back locations for those medicines. All right, so now we're going to move out to the soil treatment area and what we should plant and maintenance there.
Avoid parking vehicles or planting trees or shrubs on your drain field.
Hi, I'm Mike, a licensed on-site sewage system operator in Virginia. Septic drain fields, sometimes called leach fields, are typically a set of plastic pipes in underground infiltration trenches. They accept partially treated wastewater from a septic tank and disperse it into the soil. Here, it is naturally treated by beneficial bacteria, biochemical interactions, and filtration. Drain fields are typically installed 6 to 12 inches below the ground surface. Therefore, the weight of a vehicle could damage the pipes or compact the soil, making it difficult for the wastewater to filter into the ground. Likewise, the roots from trees and woody shrubs could become entangled with the pipes, obstructing the drainage process.
Maintaining a grassy lawn over your drain field that's free of larger, deep-rooted vegetation provides the optimal conditions for your drain field and for your septic system as a whole. So do your part to be septic smart. Shielding your field can save you money and protect you and your family's health.
So outside our homes, some things to think about is make sure that no treated water from hot tubs or pools enters your septic systems. Make sure your roof drains, and that is not what you see here in the picture. This is what the opposite of what you want to do would be having water running directly over your tank. So making sure that your roof drains go away. Again, never parking vehicles or boats or ice rinks over the top of your septic system. I saw that was a question that showed up. Making sure none of those are over the top of your septic system. So things to consider as far as landscaping, do not irrigate or fertilize. And this is a common issue we still run into, is that if people put an irrigation system in, they generally irrigate all over their yard. The challenge is, again, just think about how much water your septic system has to take. And if you are regularly putting extra water, and I know we've all seen it where people are running their irrigation system and it's raining, right? That can, again, add extra water to the system. And we just don't want to add extra nitrogen and phosphorus out there because, again, we're putting lots of it out there. Do not drive anything larger than that riding lawnmower. Do not grade or add soil over the system without talking to your installer and or your permitting authority. So some vegetation do's and don'ts. Do make sure you have good vegetation growing across the top of your system. It really helps with both erosion and freezing. We want to grow something over the top of our septic system that is drought tolerant. So what that means then is, you know, a typical year, not this one because it was so wet, right? But typical years, your lawn goes brown, it goes dormant, and the minute we get some rain, it livens back up. So that is drought tolerant. So we don't want to grow things that need a lot of irrigation over the top of the system. It is fine to frame the system with, and I recommend dwarf trees and shrubs, not giant trees, right? Ideally. And again, sometimes we're going to have a tree that's located close to where that was already there. But if you're talking about what to plant, thinking about how big that tree is going to get to be someday. Don't plant edible plants such as vegetables and herbs. So you don't want to put your vegetable garden over your septic system. And the biggest reason for that is going into fall and winter, most vegetable gardens do not have a vigorous vegetative growth across the top of the system. Don't place trees and shrubs on the soil dispersal system or near other components. So never want to plant anything woody over the top of the system. Do not place plastic landscaping sheets over the soil treatment area. Again, when you do that, again, your system won't be able to breathe. So your septic system, again, is a living, breathing system. So I see the question about the drain field versus the tank. You also do not want to plant trees and shrubs over the top of your tank. So, you know, anything that has an aggressive root structure will try to get into that tank. And you probably won't have a problem initially with the system, but down the road, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, those trees, particularly and shrubs during dry time periods, will try to find the water. They will do everything they can to get in. So you really do not want to plant any of that near either components ideally. On that note, if people have issues with tree roots getting into components, and that was something that was actually mentioned in the video, I have run into a lot of people that have issues from their house to their tank that they will have tree roots. And my general answer to that is you need to replace that pipe. Often those are older pipes, right? That might be 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years old. And a lot of those older pipes were not tight. And so once a tree root gets in, you may be able to get it to kind of go back for a little while, but eventually it's going to find its way back in. So sometimes people use chemicals to treat that, but it's not a one and done solution. If you have trees that are not high value trees, the other thing to consider if you're having a tree that's continually causing you problems is to actually cut down the tree. And I love trees, so that does not need to be the solution. But again, if it was a volunteer tree that's growing over the top of your system, it very likely may need to be cut. So you want to avoid thirsty plants that set deep roots, avoid planting dense ground covers that will interfere with evaporation. So again, drought tolerant plants, plants with short fibrous root systems, hardy and tolerant for your climate, and tolerant of either the sun or the shade condition that you have. So what this usually leads you is to fescues and grasses are usually going to be your best option. So as far as setbacks, Minnesota rules have required setbacks from buildings and structures and some architectural features. The biggest setbacks we have, again, are setbacks from lakes and rivers and streams. But other things to consider is property features such as retaining walls and walkways and hot tubs. Again, you do not want to put anything over the top of your system that's going to limit access or limit oxygen transfer. So you really want to think about your soil treatment area needs to breathe. Your septic tank needs to be clean. So you do not want to do anything that will obstruct access. I saw earlier someone talked about, what you plant even around your tank may make it hard to get into that. So sometimes people will plant lots of bushes and things that, that lid's going to have to come off. And I think sometimes I've had this issue, right? You plant something and 3 years later, it's 5 times as big as you thought it would be. So really think about how big things are going to be down the road. If you're putting in fencing and gates, also think about they're going to have to get from wherever that big pumper trunk is to your tank, and you don't want to have to take down a fence to be able to do that. So what about freezing? So freezing in septic systems is an issue that comes up from time to time, and I would say it comes up in winters in particular where we have very cold temperatures and we don't have a lot of snow cover. So that's kind of worst case scenario. So lack of cover, snow cover is one of the biggest issues. But if that area has been compacted, whether it be the soil or the snow, that can actually, again, cause the air space that's in the soil to go away. And the air is what's actually insulating. So if you have a lack of usage, so if you are, someone who leaves for weeks or months every winter, you're lucky, first of all. But second of all, that is a system that's sitting there without any heat going into it. The next common cause is leaking plumbing. If you have, again, a small flow of water going through the system, and you are not, and it's just kind of trickling through the pipes, that is more likely to freeze. So that is something, for instance, that can happen with leaks in a home, or high efficiency furnaces can cause that. If you have cold air that's getting into a system, so let's say the inspection pipe over your septic tank is letting cold air in. The last one is poor drainage. If you have a system that is just sitting full of ponded water, that water is more likely to freeze. So if you've had issues with freezing, you want to figure out, why did your system freeze? As opposed to, some winters, again, I mentioned we have those really hard winters, but even in those winters, not everyone's system freezes. So why did it freeze and where? And is there something you can do to prevent it? So I saw there was a note in the Q&A about insulating blankets. So there's one in here. You'll see on this picture, they are using straw bales as insulating. But there are, again, these insulating blankets that are sold that you can put down again and cover over your tanks or over your soil treatment system area. And they will help insulate it. So that is their purpose, is to, you know, prevent frost from going deep into the ground. So not everyone will need them, but some people have found, particularly if you have a seasonal property and you want to use it pretty sparingly during the winter. So the challenge, again, if your system freezes, is they can try to thaw it out, but sometimes you may end up having to use your system as a holding tank, which means every time the tank fills up, you'll have to have it pumped. So some things to do to prevent it would be stop mowing your grass. Higher vegetation actually is a natural insulator. You can put mulch or insulating blankets down. You can use some warm water. You can fix leaks. We do have a good resource on our website that talks about freezing. I think the MPCA has some information too. I don't know, Tim, if you want to put some of that information into the chat, but there are some resources out there if you're having problems, but it's also, again, worth figuring out, again, why did the system freeze? So before I make sure I want to make sure I address it, the mound issue. So as far as maintenance with a mound, what's really needed is cleaning your septic tank. So mounds have a septic tank and then they have a pump tank. During that service visit, that they should look in your pump tank as well, and see if there's any sludge sitting on the bottom. If you have sludge sitting on the bottom of that pump tank, you do not want, when the pump turns on to pump out to your mound, you do not want that sludge pumped out. So that should be, that tank would need to be cleaned. And that doesn't always happen, but they should be looking in there. The other thing I really recommend with mounds is, because you have a pump in there, that pump has an alarm on it. And the purpose of that alarm is, if the water level ever gets high in that tank, the alarm will turn on to tell you something's wrong. So it means something's wrong with the pump, or there's too much water coming in, but it's an issue that needs to be dealt with relatively quickly. You do have some reserve capacity, but often not much. So at that point, I would stop doing laundry and showering, probably flush minimally, and I'd get someone out to my site. But the thing is, when they're out there doing maintenance, it's good to confirm that that alarm is working. So if you ever do need it to go off, it goes off when it should. The last thing with newer mound systems, and what I mean by newer is, again, if you've had a mound system put in the last 10 or so years, they've also installed cleanouts out into the mound. And so how you know if you have cleanouts, older mounds, you would just have one inspection port where they could measure ponding in. Newer ones, you'll have multiple pipes at the surface, and sometimes they're in landscaping boxes. Those lines can actually be flushed and cleaned, because if you think about these pipes with sewage in them, they don't stay perfectly clean for the life of the system. So now with these cleanouts, they can actually flush out the lines and make sure that there's not a buildup of solids within the pipes. So if you do have a newer mound, I actually recommend as well that you have them flush out those lines. Because the other thing is, in those pipes in the mounds, there are 1/4-inch holes typically, which that sounds big, but they're not very big. So when they flush it, it makes sure that those holes actually stay clear and clean. All right, so a few things about seasonality that quite common questions that people ask. It is better to pump your septic tanks either anytime from late spring. And I say late spring because generally they can't drive. There's road restrictions going into spring. So into that April time period. So after road restrictions to sometime around now. And you just really, once we're getting into early winter, and it's so warm today, it's summer still, right? But going into fall and winter, we don't want your septic tank sitting for an extended period of time where it doesn't have any water going out to it. So that increases the likelihood of things freezing. So So the next one is what if you only use, and this commonly comes up with cabins, that you're only going to use your cabins for a couple weekends out of the winter. That is really hard on septic systems in Minnesota because there's so little heat going out there. So in those instances, one suggestion might be using your tank as a holding tank. And so what I mean by that is going into fall, you could pump out your tank and then fill it up over the winter. You have to be a little careful about that if you live in an area of a very high water table, because an empty tank sitting in the ground could float out. That's not super common, but it is something to be aware of. But the other thing might be they, again, would be insulating your system. They actually make tank heaters that can be added into systems to add heat if you've had problems with freezing. So leaving your furnace on. So again, if you, leave your home for months at a time, some people leave their furnace really low. If you have a high efficiency furnace, the challenge there again can be a small amount of condensate can trickle through those pipes and can cause freezing issues. So on our website, which I will have coming up here, we actually have a spring, summer, fall, winter section. So if you have questions about things to think about throughout the course of the year, you can find that on our website. So some key takeaways from today. The first one is just to think about how you use water in your home. So if you're able to conscientiously think about in cutting back and conserve water, that will help your septic system. If you can stagger out your water usage. So, I think a lot of homes tend to have a lot of their flow in the mornings and the evenings and on the weekends. So even on the weekends, if you can think about spreading out that laundry, not running the dishwasher all at the same time, like using all of your appliances, because what that tends to cause in your septic tank is turbulence. The next one is to really think about the products you use in your home. And this is a septic system class, but this is true for all wastewater treatment out there, is that we really do want to think about the products we're using and limiting cleaners, because ultimately what we're putting down the drain is for the most part getting treated. But as we talked about in the beginning, some of these things can persist out in the environment. We do not want to use our septic system as a garbage can. I would also just add, if I had $1 for every time I've heard, right, that I've never pumped my septic tank. And I don't think you people attending are those people tonight, but there are a lot of people that really don't understand how regular maintenance is needed with their system. And they really don't understand what they should and shouldn't put down the drain. So our septic systems, and I would say our wastewater treatment plants, aren't garbage cans either. I've visited several wastewater treatment plants, and when you the first room at a big wastewater treatment plant is a room where they screen out garbage, and you know where that garbage all goes, right? To the landfill. So we are better off putting that stuff directly in there. And one of the most egregious offenders really is sanitizing wipes, and they should have never been called flushable wipes. The word flushable means the toilet will pass it, but those things persist in septic systems and they persist in wastewater treatment plants, and they are not a good thing. If you regularly have people visiting or using your system, you may want to consider some signage about, again, what should and shouldn't be going into your toilet, because some people just don't understand. You should look out on your property, evaluate your vegetation and obstructions and traffic, and make sure none of those things are harming your septic system. So for more information, we're going to hang around after this and answer any questions that we didn't get to over the course of this presentation. So our website at the top there is theseptic.umn.edu. As I mentioned, the slides and the resources from tonight will be posted to our website. That is the same website where you signed up for this. I have the PCA website listed here, which has information about septic systems. That's also where you can find the license list for Minnesota. EPA, again, has resources on their website and information. And there's also another resource of another online class. And again, you were all here tonight, so you got the opportunity for this class, but there's an interactive homeowner course that was developed by NARA, which is the National Onsite Wastewater Recycling Association, that you can do on your own time. That's another great resource that is out there. And with that, we have lots of time for questions. Can heat tape be installed inside the pipe from the house to the tank? Do keep in mind with heat tape that in the pipe in particular, that there are a lot of solids present in the wastewater that the heat tape would catch. So it's generally not recommended to use heat tape in that pipe for that reason. So we talked about the best time to have it pumped. The inspected question is a little different. So when it comes to inspection, so keep in mind now with almost all new inspections, they will be pumping the tank. So I would avoid, as we just discussed earlier, winter pumping. For that reason, it's just not wise to pump your tank out in the middle of winter. It's also very difficult to do an inspection in the winter because you can't see the soil treatment area. So winter is just not advisable for pumping or inspection. If you have to have a system inspected in the winter, there are potentially some methods to deal with that, but that's kind of a specialized question. So I'm going to move down the list. How do I control hydrogen sulfide gas from deteriorating my concrete pump tank? So there's kind of two issues. Hydrogen sulfide can eat away at concrete. It's generally speaking a venting issue, so and a splashing issue. So there's been work actually done by the National Precast Concrete Association where they've actually looked at extending the pipe that comes into the pump tank below the liquid level, limiting splashing in that tank, and venting that pump tank. So it's probably something we could have a longer conversation about, and something we could maybe discuss. I don't know if you have a septic system professional that's helping you, but we really need to minimize the formation of gases above the liquid level, and then we need to figure out a way to actually vent those gases that are often not naturally venting back through your plumbing. So the next one's a really good question. Where does my septic guy take my waste when he cleans out my tank? So he takes it to one of two places. He either takes it to a wastewater treatment plant, or he land applies it, like basically like manure or fertilizer. If the wastewater treatment plant's a pretty obvious answer, but if they are land applying it, there are actually federal rules that are required. So it either is required to be limed and or injected into the soil to prevent contact and vectors. So there's a lot of requirements if it is applied to fields. There's cropping restrictions, all kinds of requirements around that. All right, the next one I see is, can a biomat die and or seal up the bottom of the trench? A biomat really wouldn't die. It's, at the end of the day, it's microorganisms. I think your other question is more relevant though, can it seal up the bottom of the trench? And the answer is eventually. So I mentioned septic systems don't last forever, and when they often malfunction, it is at that biomat interface where basically the sewage has been meeting the soil. So what can happen over time is that some of those inorganic solids can build up, even the microbes living there, they die. So eventually that biomat can become too restrictive. There also can be other things we put down the drain. I mentioned iron filters before. It's kind of a not common issue because not that many people have iron filters, but those iron solids can plug up the soil. So that biomat, generally speaking, is a good thing, but it can get to be too thick to the point that it limits water movement into the system. So All right, so the next one is it normal to occasionally smell the septic system? So I mentioned if you open up any tank, you'll smell the septic system. If you can smell it in your yard occasionally, what you are probably smelling is one of two things. One, it may be that your tank risers are not completely sealed, and so there may be some sewer gases getting out there. The other common place that sewer gases go is back through your building sewer and out through your plumbing stack. And that is naturally how they're designed to vent. So sometimes a wind pattern may move those sewer gases in your direction. A little sewer gas smell is not harmful to anyone. It's, you don't want to breathe a lot of those gases, but just occasionally smelling them, if they were harmful, I don't think I'd be alive anymore. I've smelt it a lot. So it's just really, again, so it is not necessarily a bad thing to occasionally smell that. So. All right, so the next one, about 3 years ago, the area of my mound had significant leakage, but it has not since. Can I assume it's fine? What might have caused it? Well, that's a harder one to answer. Usually when a system has a problem, it's a more long-term thing. If you used a lot of water during that time, or if you had leaks into your system or the system got overloaded, that would be one potential explanation, stormwater coming from somewhere else, but it is very uncommon that they get wet and just naturally go away. So I wouldn't necessarily assume it's okay, but I mean, if it's not surfacing, it's not surfacing, but it's probably something to talk to, your maintainer about in the future. So I have grass on the drainage field for my mound system, but landscaping tarp, it just moved, and river rock over the tank itself. Should I take out the rock and put grass over the septic tank? So the benefit of having soil over the top of your septic tank is heat loss. You will lose more heat with rock, and the warmer your septic tank is, the better. The other challenge of rock over septic tanks, and this may not be your specific issue, but last week I opened up a tank and we had to clear the rock, and it made it much harder to get into the tank. So it's actually better, and people don't generally like this. If your riser sticks up a little bit, it makes it way easier to get into the tank, but that's usually something that's not done by homeowners. So if you haven't had problems, the landscaping fabric and rock is something I see on other systems. It's not illegal or bad. It's just the downside is you will have more heat loss through that. And we do like to keep things warm. So the heat tape question again, heat tape is really better off wrapped around pipes than in pipes. So that question came up again, and generally not run in sewer pipes just because there are solids and sewage. It's not clean water that's running through those pipes. So the next one, my septic pumper said I could drain my RV into my septic systems. This is only a week or two per year when we have company. Guests are encouraged to use the indoor toilet. Will this cause issues? The biggest issue with RVs in general is RV chemicals are pretty, in general, pretty hard. They have particularly ones that contain formaldehyde, which is very common. I would agree with you in general, having people using your plumbing inside your house, not having them dump if they've been traveling for longer distances is better. I would not add that very rapidly into your system. I would have that sewage enter your tank very slowly. Otherwise it could stir it up. So it's again, you think about those people would be in your house, right? That's kind of the argument. A lot of those fixtures are lower flow, so it tends to be more concentrated, but the number of users shouldn't be that different. So limiting chemical usage and not having them dump large loads is my best advice. So the follow-up question here, our cottage only has a holding tank and no drain field. Should it be pumped out completely in the fall if it won't be used for 8 months? I'm just going to make sure there's nothing at the end. We do have a very high water table and we're very close to the lake. I would not pump it out before the fall because I'd be worried about flotation. So an empty tank sitting in the ground is kind of like a bobber. And so if there is a lot of water around that tank, it can cause the tank to pop out of the ground. So in that case, I would leave the tank wherever you happen to be. Half full would be fine. I wouldn't want it plumb full. I mean, you don't want it to cause any structural issues in the tank if it happens to freeze. And a lot of that freezing issue will also relate to how deep the tank is in the ground. Once you get 4 or 5 feet in the ground, there really isn't frost. So if the tank is deeper, it's also less likely to freeze. It's also less likely to pop out of the ground. So, so I think that hopefully answered your question there. And if not, again, when we get to the end here, we can chat. So, can an existing trench be cleaned out and reused? So this goes at is it a good system? So there are older systems that really are too close to the water table, don't meet separation. Those always need to be replaced. Generally speaking, we do not clean them out and reuse them. The only time we typically put a septic system where an existing septic system was located is if there is no other location on the property. So it is very difficult to, I would say, rejuvenate a system that's failing. I won't say never. There are examples and there is potential, but if you have a location for a new system, it's usually going to be your surefire bet. It's kind of like your engine blew on your car, and the question is, should you get a rebuilt one or a new one? If you get a rebuilt one, you don't know how long it's going to last. And if you get a new septic system, you'll have that 25, 30, 40 years in front of you. If you try to fix an existing one, it can be problematic. And it does, as I mentioned, it would need to be a system that meets separation. The next question, the gray water goes into the drain field. The gray water must go into the septic system. So some homes, when they got their first washing machine in the 70s, often didn't plumb, for instance, the laundry water in. So all the gray water should go first into the septic tank and then out to the soil treatment area. So is there a resource for hydrogen sulfide gas in tanks? So this is something, again, Danielle, if you don't mind putting my email again in the chat. The hydrogen sulfide conversation, particularly in relation to concrete, is, if that was the issue, is a more complicated solution. So I'd be happy to send some resources. So I don't know if that was your specific question. Hydrogen sulfide is made in every septic tank. Every septic system makes hydrogen sulfide. There's naturally sulfur occurring in water and in the anaerobic conditions of the septic tank, hydrogen sulfide gas is made. So the question is, how do we properly vent it and deal with it so it doesn't cause structural issues within the system? So someone has an older septic system, 42 years, and I would say, yippee, I mean, you've gotten a lot of good life out of that system. And the question is pumping it annually okay? Is it wise and or necessary? Yeah, the answer goes back to how dirty is your septic tank. So what I would ask the next time you got your tank pumped is I would ask your pumper or your maintainer, how full was your tank? Pumping it every year is not a bad thing. Like, to me, that's not pumping it too much. That's sometimes the question, could I be pumping my tank too much? So pumping it once a year, and if that's on your schedule, I'd say go with it. It's worked for you for 42 years, and that's a good thing. But on the other hand, if you're concerned and, you know, that you're doing it too much, you could ask how full the tank is and do you need to be on every year, or could you go to every other year? So there are people that, you know, getting their tank pumped is another expense. And if you're on a limited income, you may be able to go to every 2 years. But like I said, for some people, it's just easier to have it on the calendar. It's not a huge expense. They just do it once a year. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So someone who works for the SWCD provides them links to the septic system revealed video. Is there something else we'd recommend? Because it's very old. It's actually funny. We still, again, have it on our website. And like, again, I think the glasses that both Dave and Wanda were in it are coming back. So that's how long it's been. So I guess I'll have to think about it, Erica, if there's a better resource as far as a video. I mean, that is kind of the nice thing, is it is a video. We are going to be posting this webinar, which could be an alternative, but it ends up being quite long for most people, where that video I think was more around 20 minutes. I do think the homeowner course that was developed by NARA would be another resource, but again, it's not just a simple video, it's actually kind of an interactive course. Might be an option, but it'd be another good resource to send to people. So I do see a question about, or a comment just about native grasses. Oh, where did it go? It disappeared on me. Native grasses can be okay. I just do want to make one comment about grasses and other things that could be planted. The key thing is that you manage it. Any sort of garden that you have, you want to make sure that you don't eventually allow brush and trees and other things to grow in the area, which will often happen. We just don't, again, want anything with a woody vegetation to grow in the system. The Pepto-Bismol pink tank. So I don't know if you're in the metro. The only pink trucks I'm aware of are actually, I think Olson's trucks are pink. So, and they are out of the Forest Lake area. They're more of a hot pink, I thought, but maybe hot pink's pretty hard to get on a truck. So I think, I don't know if you guys see any that I missed. I was trying to get them in order, but if anyone else has questions, or are there, I think there are a few hands up. It's a little hard for me to see everything. Okay, so Laura, if you're there, you can talk. Lisa and Andy too. I saw you had your hands raised. So if you, let's see. You should be able to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question.
Sarah, another one popped up in the Q&A last minute. Is it okay to use Rid-X in your system?
Well, that was the question when I talked about septic system additives. We do not recommend the use of any additives, including Rid-X. It's not particular to Rid-X. Just again, Rid-X, well, again, in general, there's no third-party research that supports the use. So we would not recommend the use of any septic system additive. What about, oh, I have a 25-year-old septic system that has been well cared for. We are planning to sell our home. Is there a need to plan for replacement of the drain field, or can this have useful life? It could still have useful life. The biggest thing to consider if you're selling a property is, will you have to have an inspection? So that's something I would check with your permitting authority or county, is do they require an inspection at property transfer? Because if your property needs an inspection and you're planning to sell, it's better to know the outcome of that inspection. At least that's my belief. Some people would rather wait for the property to sell and see what happens. Myself, I'm a planner. I'd rather know, is it passing? And if it's been well held for and it's compliant, that system could have another 10, 15 years in it. There is actually the way, like, you can actually look, particularly if you have a drain field system, to see how much of your system is being utilized, how many lateral runs. If you have a mound system, is there any ponding after a dose? So you could look more at longevity of the system from that perspective, but 25 years is not the end of necessarily of a septic system. And we saw someone earlier, right, who said they had one that was 40 years old. So they certainly can last longer than 25. So what can cities and townships do to help homeowners with understanding septic systems better? It's a really good question. I feel like we need more public education outreach campaigns, right? So how many people we can get to attend things like this is still limited. So we do, the University of Minnesota does sell a document that's handed out with many permits called a Septic System Owner's Guide. So some permitting authorities hand those out, particularly with new septic systems. But anything you can do to get educational materials into people's hands, to get them aware of what they have in their property. So providing resources. And I do think that people who just got a new system sometimes are more engaged at that point, because they just, they just had to spend a bunch of money, right? So what are they going to do? They may be more engaged at that time. So I do think that from the government side, that is the best time to potentially engage with them. But, I think about lake associations and other groups that are promoting clean water. There's also a good tie in there. All of our septic system professionals are great resources too. So all new systems, again, are required to have a management plan in Minnesota. So that management plan is meant for the property owner to understand. So that's another good again, with new systems anyway, educational opportunity. But I think it's, more stories in the local newspaper, right? Anything you can get for people to become more aware, but it's always a challenge. So how far from the field should a tree be? I would say, again, in general, it depends on the tree. How close do I want a willow tree? I want it at least 50 feet away. So willow are known, right, for water loving trees that seek it out. A small ornamental tree that's going to get to be 20 feet tall, I would say 20 feet away. So ideally, when you think about what's above the ground with a tree, right, all of that same amount is below the ground, and sometimes it even goes laterally even further. So thinking about at least the drip line of that tree when it's grown is ideally where I'd start. If I were planting a new tree. That being said, with existing septic systems, there are trees across Minnesota that are planted closer than that. So there is no requirement when we are siting a septic system to be X distance away from the tree. But just know the closer you are to it, the more it has the risk, not always, but has the risk of influencing that system. Can we get rid of the biomat in a drain field? Well, I'm going to first remind us that sometimes a biomat is good. And so in most of our systems, for most of the life of the system, the biomat is a good thing. At the end of the system life, when the biomat gets to be too limiting, it is very difficult, and we do not have good options to deal with that biomat. So the most common way that I know we occasionally deal with it in Minnesota is with mound systems. So if you remember, mound systems are this natural soil, and then we put the sand, and then we put the distribution system. Sometimes they will peel off the upper layer of that sand, which will have a biomat that has built up on it, and they will rebuild. But that's taking the biomat away. It's not really, so I guess that's getting rid of it. With trench systems, that's much more difficult because that is existing in the natural soil. And also keep in mind where that system has been located, we have been putting somewhere in the range of 60,000 gallons of water every day for the last X amount of years. So we have changed the hydrology. So that's why, again, whenever possible, we site that system somewhere else. How many people attended tonight? I don't know, Danielle, if you have. I will tell you, we had a lot of people signed up that on this Tuesday night decided not to come. So yeah.
202.
There you go. So hints for snowbirds to keep the system active when not at home. That's a really difficult one. So I know of a few people who have someone come into their home and, run a hot load of laundry. And so this kind of goes back to, do you winterize your home? Do you keep the heat on? Do you have a high efficiency furnace? So, I mean, for instance, if you have a high efficiency furnace, some people will put in a small sump pump. So instead of having that trickle of water, they actually have a pump that doses out an amount. But aside from that, your only options might be, again, like if you're going to have a small amount of water going in, pumping out those tanks, or the other option, again, would be to have someone come in and use some hot water. But, you have to think about one hot load of laundry, like how much of that is that in the big scheme of things. And if you're truly gone for most of the winter, if you're really a snowbird that leaves, let's say you leave around the holidays and come back in April, the system may be fine. And it also even goes to depth, like how deep are your components. So it gets a little bit more complicated there. So. Yep, Dwayne, the chemical Drano will destroy the bacteria in a septic tank. So the question is, will it destroy it all? And what happens when you do that? So let's say you used Drano and you ran it out to your septic tank and you killed off a lot of the good microorganisms. What happens? Well, eventually they will repopulate. So once you, again, start feeding that system again, flushing the toilet, using your system, the bacteria will eventually reestablish. It will just take time. So, and during that time period where you upset the tank, the performance of that tank, the solids removal, the settling may be impacted. So if you knew, you did that, or another thing sometimes people do is they'll shock chlorinate their well and they'll run all of that chlorinated water out. Same kind of issue, right? A lot of chlorinated water kills off bacteria, flushes, stirs up solids, causes problems. So if you knew you did something, you could clean out your tank and start over, which is easier for the system. But also if you give it time and you stop whatever killed the bacteria, the microorganisms will also come back. So. What is the best time of the year to pump out the holding tank? So, it says summer or fall. I've been told October, so it is empty during the winter. Also told late summer, so bacteria has time to build out. So I'm going to clarify the question here, holding tank versus septic tank. So again, a holding tank is a tank that is pumped every time it fills up. So that tank again, the only time I wouldn't want it empty going into winter is if you have a very high water table, because you have the risk of flotation. If you're talking about septic tank, I would agree that summer, anywhere from spring to around now, early fall would be better. The temperature in the tank stays pretty consistent unless you have a very shallow tank. It may get a little colder, but October still, ground temperatures are still relatively warm. So I'm not worried about October. And depending who pumps out your tank, people who land apply are able to do that in the late spring and fall. So some of them will want to pump your tank in the fall because they can put it onto fields when they can't in the summer when things are growing. So, fall pumping isn't necessarily a bad idea. So. Oh, and you meant the septic tank. So again, I would say anywhere from spring to early fall is a fine time to pump your septic tank. All right, that was a lot of questions, which when we saw that a lot of people were signed up, I'm like, most people come to these classes with a question. So I'm glad you guys had a lot of questions. I hope we answered them. I think, Danielle, you did put my email into the chat. So if we weren't able to answer all of your questions tonight, or if you have follow-up questions, things you'd like more information about, please send me an email. If it's something you prefer to talk about over the phone, we can do that as well. If anyone wants to ask a question with your voice, again, we can turn on your microphone and you can answer that, or I'll stick around for a few more minutes here tonight. But I know a lot of people have probably left because it's 9 o'clock at night. So I just want to thank you again for attending this evening.